Okay, in this video, let's take a look at desaturating to give the look and feel of a black and white photograph. So let me come over to this image, and there's a couple of ways that you can do this. There is an image mode grayscale, but that will change more than just the look and feel. So instead of using that, we're going to use the image adjustments. We could either go to hue saturation and just pull the saturation all the way down, and that creates a black and white illusion. Or we can go to image adjustment, desaturate, and there's a hotkey for that, Shift Command U. Now this can still be printed on a CMYK printer or uploaded to an RGB monitor. That's the advantage of doing it through desaturation rather than converting it to a black and white image. Now, one thing you might have noticed when I changed this, there's the appearance that the contrast has changed, because before we had the vibrancy of the yellow in the seaweed here, and now we just have the black and white. So a lot of times when you convert a color image to black and white, you're going to notice that the image looks lower in contrast and a little bit dull. So you definitely, after that, you want to reassess your adjustments such as levels. And I'll usually start with levels. Now again, don't go into the crazy level of contrast. Believable, but helped out with some accentuating. Now, I like to use dodging and burning a lot, so I would probably just pull up the lights and darks a little bit to give it that pop. And then I would switch over to the dodging and burning. So if I've got the dodge here and I go to highlights, now I can also change the exposure. So I can have it affect, if it's getting bright too fast, I can really slow this down by doing a softer exposure. Now I'm just getting a little bit of a change. I can do Command Z and go back and forth and take a look at that. I can zoom in a little bit. So I can kind of paint here and decide what areas do I want, how is the eye moving through the rectangle? And do I want to pull focus, for example, more up here? Then I might have a little more contrast there, a little bit less somewhere else. I might switch over to the burn tool, and if I set that to shadows, I could make the shadows pop a tiny bit more. Another thing I sometimes do with the burn tool is large swaths of areas, similar to the sky I did before, but where I just want to add a little more contrast, especially around the corners of the edges. Sometimes those go a little bit too bright or a little bit too dull, and if I want the eye to move in towards the center, you might give that not an obvious vignette, but yet it's still a little bit of vignetting on the edges. And then I could come back in with a dodge, maybe a very, very large dodge. Maybe instead of the highlights, this time I'll do the midtones. And just, let's see, maybe that's a little too subtle. And so let's take a look at the change here between when I first desaturated it and now. Now, sometimes I go a little bit too far. This may be a little bit too much contrast because I'm trying to make a point as to how this works. So I could always go back here, and then I could rethink some of the steps that I made and see if I want to do a little bit less brightness here in the center. Now, I promised you earlier that I would also show you how you can do a lot of these steps on the layers palette. So let me go back to where I desaturated this. Let me go back to the beginning when it's still color. So if I go to my layers palette now, down here on the bottom, there's this little black and white circle. If I click on that, you'll see that you have some things that look very similar, like levels, for example. So let me go up to levels, and you'll see that what that makes is what's called an adjustment layer. So this works the same way as working directly off of image adjustments, except that it will become a layer that you can turn on and off. So here I could adjust the contrast. Let's say this is one type of contrast I want to try out. Then I could close that. Then I could come back here and I could do a different levels. And I could decide to add more on top to have two levels at the same time, or to turn one off. And then now I'm going to try a different variation. So then I can say, do I like that kind of contrast, or do I like this kind? Or maybe I want to see what the two together look like. So here I can have levels, and then I can also add hue saturation. And I can combine the three. So that allows you to try out a few different variations. Now, there isn't one here for dodging and burning. So if you want to try out dodging and burning without making a permanent change, one thing you can do is duplicate the background layer. So I can select the layer and I can go to the drop down up here and I can do duplicate layer. Then on this layer, I can do some dodging and burning. And then I could come back down to the first layer and I could try something else. Then I could decide, okay, I want to see this layer and this adjustment, and this is going to be my final piece, for example. Or I could say, no, I like this one combined with that better. So whatever you end up with in the end, you're then going to need to save it. So once we've created layers, this is no longer going to save as a JPEG. Now, a lot of times when you shoot, these will come in as TIFFs, TIF files. So we always want to save a copy of the layered file and of the flattened file. So I'm going to do a save as, and here we're going to choose Photoshop. This is going to create what's called a PSD file. So I would give this some kind of name that's going to be easy for me to remember. And then I would go ahead and save it as a PSD. And like I said, when I do that, that's going to keep my duplicated layers and my adjustment layers. A JPEG is only one layer. When you're ready to take an image and upload it onto the internet, you're going to need to convert it to a JPEG. You're not going to be able to put a layered file online. So here I'm going to do a save as, and this time instead of Photoshop, I'm going to choose JPEG. And you'll see that the file extension up here has changed to JPEG. And when I do that, it's going to ask me, oops, not if I want to replace it. Let me give me a new name. It's going to ask me if it's okay to flatten it. So in here, we can leave the image options at the maximum with this pulled all the way up. Leave these at the default, and then go ahead and say OK. Now, if I go back and get that that image, here's the convert to black and white JPEG. When I open this up, I'll see that. So now I have two files. I have this PSD file, and now I have the JPEG file. And this one you can see is completely flat. So that's the image that you're going to want to upload online.